room's a couple of minutes slow. It is 5:30 by my watch, so we will get started. And if we could please all stand for the acknowledgement of country, prayer and service announcement. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of our beautiful lands and our surrounding waters, Ngarrindjeri and Yamatji. The community, we recognise and we respect their culture, lands and waters.
Mighty God, we ask you to bless this council, not to be an agent of the people of this city. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the honouring of your.
Gratefully acknowledge the men and women of the Navy, Army and Air Force who made the supreme sacrifice for the preservation of Australia's freedom. So proclaim our gratitude to those who return to us.
Thank you very much. Please be seated and welcome everybody. Welcome gallery and those that are listening online to the first council meeting of 2022. So we do have one apology, and that is Councillor Kemp, who I believe at the moment. Is Brian Littley, are you still there? Because I can't see you on the screen.
I am still here, but it's I can't see everything else. Just drop out, but it's come back in. So.
Okay, if just make sure that we can. Oh, there you are. I can see you again now. Michelle's just fixed that. We've got an item adjourned and lying on the table, which is 4.1. That was a motion that is currently before council. That was moved by Councillor Hales and seconded by Councillor Schofield. The motion is that council authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign the tabled memorandum of agreement with Big Duck Boat Tours, granting an operational licence to conduct educational programming from the South Australia Rail Centre, including the leasing of office space within the building. It has been our previous way of doing it, that people can speak if they want to, if they've spoken previously to that. So I'll just ask Councillor Hales. Councillor Henderson, I see you've got your hand up, and I know that you foreshadowed another motion, but we actually have this motion on the table at the moment, so we need to deal with this one first.
Realise that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hales, is there anything that Councillor Mann?
Mayor Jenkins, I'd like to disclose a perceived conflict of interest, the basis of which I'm unable to disclose, and I'll be leaving the chamber. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Hales, you were the mover of this motion. Did you have anything that you wanted to add? No. Councillor Schofield, did you have anything that you wanted to add as seconder to this motion?
Yes, I would. I've had another look at this, and I think there's a couple of things that haven't been picked up previously. And one is the Indigenous component of this particular application, and the work that they do and the work that they want to bring into the centre. The other is special needs, and that hasn't been addressed by anybody else. And again, this applicant does. And the other is the networking existence that they have, a huge client base, which would then be able to start off on the right foot right from the beginning.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add or contribute to this motion? Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Yes, Mayor. I'm definitely against this motion. I think from the beginning, this was about delivering of educational services, and it's mentioned time and again in the expression of interest, in the evaluation of the proposals, and yet the way in which this was conducted it wasn't about education at all. It was about tours and other sorts of activities. I think that here the we're supposing in some parts here that there's going to be savings, there's going to be the operator is going to be self-sufficient and will be providing for itself. But in the memorandum of agreement, we have this tangled relationship between the staffing of the visitor centre and the operator. There's also a totally inadequate process in place for monitoring the performance of the operator. This needs to be a really key activity in our offering for tourism services down here. If you like, we could regard school children coming down here as tourist services, but the other services that we do for the adult sector, international and interstate, etc., that come down here, having a education-based experience is really important. And the processes that were put in place here to deal with this evaluation didn't take those into account. Also, the discovery process, one of the bidders was not interviewed by the assessment team, which I find to be an exceedingly poor process. And I believe that for the city itself, for both the tourist industry, our expectation that we are a city that has education of its children at heart, has its marine environment at heart, that having that the way this has been conducted, this doesn't deliver that for our city, short or long term. To me, I'm disappointed that that to have to say these things, but that I believe objectively, if you look at what's going on here, that this is not a good outcome for the city.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Henderson?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm not happy with this recommendation sitting on the table at the moment. Whilst the Big Duck Boat Tours has a sound base in ecotourism and marketing and are very good in these areas, I don't see anything in their application to show they have any key personnel capable of running educational programs. I want to make it quite clear that ecotourism is not scientific education. And how do I know this? I've actually got qualifications in both of those areas, and they are quite different in terms of training and in their needs qualifications. I believe an alternative application, that's if this motion is lost, I'd like to put an alternative motion on the table to sign a memorandum of agreement with another applicant, a joint application by the two ladies, Ali and Renee, because I believe these people do have the correct background in education and training and would be quite capable of running the education programs in the Wales Centre. Both of these ladies have tertiary training in marine science, and one of them has a wealth of experience in educating young people from preschoolers right through to university students, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And from her resume, it's quite clear, having worked in the marine sciences area as a research officer and carrying out biodiversity surveys extensively in this area and throughout other parts of Australia, this applicant is more than qualified to offer these scientific educational services. The other applicant with her has qualifications in outdoor education and also with preschoolers, primary and secondary school children, and also has qualifications in business management and frontline marketing. The second person also has proven track record in creating new ecotourism businesses and has shown that she works cooperatively with other locally based businesses doing that. Both of these ladies have marine experience from right around Australia, not just in our own region. Also, they have outlined in their application what their approach will be to develop the education program, aligning with the national curriculum for each year level, and have also outlined a plan to run programs during term times as well as in school holidays, including immersive education in the great outdoors. They've also indicated their desire to work with local schools and to run long-term scientific monitoring programs with senior students and do research projects with them, and also they wish to encourage citizen science in the region. They've obviously looked hard at what's been offered in the past and are willing to build on this, and I believe they do a very good job. I think here we have two very well qualified local educators ready to offer this to our community, and I think we should offer them the opportunity to do so. I'd also like to point out that I have no conflict of interest in this. I've never met any of the applicants or spoken to any of them as far as I am aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I believe that there's an alternative recommendation here if this one is lost, that council grant an operational licence to educational programming from the South Australian Whales Centre to those two applicants, and that Chief Executive Officer be authorised to negotiate and execute an appropriate memorandum of understanding with them. So that is here if this motion is lost. Does anybody else want to speak for or against the current motion before the council? Councillor Glasbrook.
Thank you. Yeah, just to support the two members that have spoken, I am also against this this decision. Firstly, I would like to thank the administration and the council staff for going out to expressions. I think it's going to be a great outcome either way, whomever is the final applicant for the Whales Centre and for the education program. I think it's been needed and probably long overdue. So I do think this is a great initiative. But I also support the two girls. I think if you read the the expressions of interest form, it was clearly about education and clearly about education from the Whales Centre. So I believe that these two girls would be the best for that situation. I acknowledge that Big Duck has an enormous potential and is a fantastic asset for this region. And I've actually went out on the Big Duck with some friends of ours over the Christmas period, and it was absolutely fantastic experience. But I certainly don't think it was education. And if that's what we're looking at, well, I believe that these two girls would be in the best position to deliver that service. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Is there anyone else that wants to speak? Councillor Hales, would you like to close the debate? Right. I'll now put that motion to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That motion is lost. I believe that you have a motion, Councillor Henderson.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. If you'd like me to read.
If you'd like, if you've got it there in front of you.
My motion is that Council authorise the CEO to sign a memorandum of agreement Field and Renee Newman granting an operational licence Whales Centre.
That's that different word. All right. The Marilyn, the wording on the screen is slightly different to your wording, but it's the same intent. Are you happy with that? Can you see the screen?
I don't have the screen.
The wording says Council grant an operational licence to conduct educational programming from the South Australian Whales Centre to Alexandra Bloomfield and Renee Newman and that the Chief Executive Officer be authorised to negotiate and execute an appropriate memorandum with Alexandra Bloomfield and Renee Newman to implement the licence.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
You happy with that? Do I have a seconder for that?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Robertson is seconding that. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson?
No, I think I've said everything I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson, would you like to speak to that?
No, Mayor.
Does anybody want to speak to that? Not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Now go to item. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mann. Yep. If you could bring him back in, that'd be great. Thank you, Councillor Mann. We now move on to item 5.1, minutes of the previous meeting, the 13th of December. Would someone like to move that they are confirmed as true and accurate? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hales, do either of you want to speak to that? No? Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. We don't have any deputations, but we have two lots of questions from the gallery. We have questions from Mr. Charles. If you'd like to come up, Mr. Charles.
Thank you, Mayor.
Please, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Shall I do the preamble as well, or just the question? What would suit you best?
Just the question would be fine, thank you.
Okay, I will say it's on behalf of Team Victor and the community. Is it correct that at the council meeting, the majority of elected members approved the spending of community capital to prepare and bitumenise the private car park of the Grosvenor Hotel, Victor Harbour? Will you please supply, if this is the case, the date of the council meeting and the agenda item number when the variation to the scope of the Coral Street contract was presented to council for debate?
As with all of our local tender processes on the Main Street precinct, it's clearly articulated in the documentation that any detours required to be put in place during the construction of each stage were the responsibility of the successful contractor to negotiate with the relevant owners and engage in private arrangements for this to occur. The cost of these arrangements, including any variations, are included in the project overhead/preliminaries and become part of the construction contract for which council is responsible for payment. Any agreements or arrangements made in relation to the works undertaken are between the contractor and the owners or the lessees of the land, not council. All elected members were briefed on Main Street Stage 3 project during the planning, construction and the implementation stages of the project. Elected members are not directly involved in the operational component of council projects unless they require a substantial deviation from the project plan or a significant budget variation. As with any project of council, the CEO is required to be aware and have oversight of their management. In regards to this particular matter, it was brought to the attention of the CEO by the lessor of the property following challenges he was experiencing with a former staff member over the significant delay and the interruptions he was experiencing to his business as a result of site works. There was an agreement between the contractor and the Grosvenor Hotel lessor for traffic to be diverted through the hotel car park while the railway terrace threshold was constructed. It was anticipated that the use of this area would be for approximately 2 weeks. As compensation for the use of the car park, the contractor agreed to prepare the site to a standard that was ready for asphalt. During the 2 weeks, I believe there was a number of delays, which resulted in the initial 2 weeks exceeding well beyond that particular time frame. And due to extended use of the car park area, the contractor made further arrangements with the Grosvenor Hotel lessor to asphalt the area following completion of their use. This was approved as a variation to the contract at a cost of less than $5,000.
Thank you. That actually provides more questions than it does answers to me. Industry sources say that when you have a contract and the scope is set, then, and we've done some research on this, that the scope, this car park was not within the scope, therefore it was not a variation to the contract because the contract did not include the car park.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Charles. This isn't a debate.
Okay, that's fine.
You have another question?
Yes, I'd like to know that whether that reply you've just given will be in the minutes, or I can have a copy of it, please.
It won't be in the minutes.
It won't be in the minutes?
Unless it's moved.
So we won't know who the member of staff was or whether they work for the council or someone else?
It won't be in the minutes,
Okay.
Councillor Charles, unless it's
All right,
moved
my
to be in
second
the minutes.
question. It's a finite community capital has been spent bitumenising a hotelier's private car park. Do you personally or any elected members believe the use of this community capital was appropriate in the community's interest?
I think I've answered that with the first question, Councillor Charles.
You haven't said whether it's in the community interest.
Councillor Charles, I've answered that in the first question. I'm not giving you any personal view, and that's your the answers that you have received. Thank you.
And well done, Council, on that Wales Centre. Beautifully done.
We have some questions from Mr. Andrews. If you'd like to take a seat and ask your questions, Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. My question, which I sent in at 3:23 p.m. To the Council is, as the horse tram is totally funded by this Council, I believe the Council has a legal and moral responsibility as well as a duty of care regarding its operations and the infrastructure it operates on with regard to safety. Therefore, as the rails for the tram on the causeway are, in my opinion, a tripping hazard and due to the apparent non-compliance of the safety and handrails on the causeway, I ask who's responsible for settling any insurance claim against the horse tram or the infrastructure it operates on, including the tram lines on the causeway. I carry on because I'm assuming that you won't be able to answer this straight away. Can you?
Please carry on.
Okay. And the second question is, clearly the rails at the boarding or disembarking station at this end of the causeway do not appear to comply with safety standards expected of today's residents or visitors. Did the Council Building Inspector authorise their structure as being safe and according to the AS codes, Australian Standard Codes, that is? That's all.
Thank you. As you may know, the causeway is owned and has been built by the Department for Infrastructure and Transport. They have confirmed that it has been constructed to relevant Australian standards. Sorry. Council building surveyors have not had a role in authorising the structure as the project was assessed and approved by the State Commission Assessment Panel. The Local Government Mutual Liability Scheme are aware of the concerns that you have raised regarding the handrails and potential trip hazards that you have said are hazards. They have advised that Council and the Victor Horse Tram Authority are indemnified. You had another question, Mr. Andrews.
You've answered it. Thank you very much. You have answered that as far as I'm concerned, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no petitions And so we now go to item 9, Office of the Chief Executive, outstanding resolutions. The recommendation is that council receive and note the outstanding resolutions for the January report. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to that? No. Councillor Henderson, no. Does anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. 9.2 is the 2022 Local Government Association Ordinary General Meeting. The call for proposed items of business. We had both Councillor Henderson and also Councillor Robertson propose items of business, so we'll go through the recommendations one by one. The first recommendation is that we receive and note the call for items business report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Hales. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to the report? Does anybody want to speak to the report? All those in favour of receiving the report? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The second recommendation is an item that's submitted by Councillor Henderson. That council submits that the Ordinary General Meeting requests the Local Government Association to advocate for the federal government to remove the luxury car tax on electric vehicles and fuel-efficient vehicles, and that's submitted to the Local Government Association. So that's recommendation 2, which includes points 1 and 2. You're moving that way, Councillor Henderson? And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Henderson, would you like to speak to that?
No, I think all of the information is in the document. I think it speaks for itself.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson, as seconder, do you want to speak to it? No. Does anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The second recommendation is a recommendation from Councillor Robertson. That's research into population status and decline of the little penguins in South Australia. That the Ordinary General Meeting requests the Local Government Association to lobby the state government to revisit the strategies and management plans around increasing the little penguin population within all coastal councils to save them from extinction, and submitted to the Local Government Association. You want to move that way, Councillor Robertson? Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Hales. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, I do. The information is well presented here by the council staff on pages 39 and 40. I just wanted to briefly highlight there are two issues to this at the background of this proposal to the LGA. A previous council before last put a motion to the LGA, which was passed, that highlighted the issue of providing research funds and research activity for the protection of the little penguin population in Granite Island in particular, in South Australia in general, and included the strong recommendation that there be serious research done on the significant declines in the little penguin populations, which, as we know, are absolutely vital to our efforts to attract visitors here, who are primarily coming to see our wildlife, and little penguins are a key part of that. So anyway, the government at the time in 2015 flatly rejected any effort they were not going to do anything proposed from the local government association from out of the motion passed. So we're revisiting that situation, hoping that there might be a different change of attitude towards the little penguin populations. But more importantly, it's the issues coming up that are facing councils. On the bottom of page 39, our Victor Harbor Council is one, but all the other coastal councils in SA, and indeed the nation, are under increasing pressure to better manage their coastal environment in the face of climate change, rising sea levels, reducing pollutants in stormwater discharge, providing protection infrastructure, the reducing plastic debris in the sea, conserving marine native flora and fauna, and presenting a top quality nature-based experience to residents and visitors. All of these expectations are going to place enormous pressure on the council's budget, but also on council's ability to be able to triage good decision making, because the complexity of the ocean environment in which we're expected to have these conserve these assets that we have. And so this is aimed at getting the LGA to have another crack at the South Australian government, but also to put in there the proposal that we need as councils some serious research money to be able to be provided to follow up in this first instance, the little penguins, but they're just because of their canary in the coal mine status in terms of the marine ecology, that following on to other birds and other species as well. We need, as councils for the future, real partners and collaborators and excellent and top quality information on which to base the decisions for spending lots of money. So what we're looking for here, secondly, is that when we need a largely citizen science-based but university-managed led program of research to guide council decision making on key issues affecting the penguin population fluctuation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Hales, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I fully support Councillor Robertson in the way he is seeking to tackle this challenge that we have before us, or more or less highlight a challenge that the state government has in its hands, them being the custodian owner of the island and its inhabitants. I remember the Granite Island that I used to visit when down on holidays as a kid, and the number of penguins that were all over the place, and think of the value that that had as a tourism draw card to our region. I, as a kid, loved it. My parents loved taking me over there because I was entertained and out of their hair for a bit, as long as I wasn't climbing on too many rocks. And if the state government's serious about this nature-based tourism experience, this is one of the key examples of one that they're letting slip through the fingers. So I totally support Councillor Robertson's efforts here in trying to gather that wider support across the local governments of South Australia. We've supported a lot of other councils in things that don't directly affect the City of Victor Harbor at these meetings, and so it's only fair that we ask them to also support us in issues that face us when seeking state government to change policy or attitudes towards things. So yeah, more than happy to second this motion and support Councillor Robertson what he's seeking to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Schofield.
Thank you. There was an email that was sent to me through the Landscape Board. There was significant grant money provided to the Flinders University for research and of the penguins on Granite Island, and that was a couple of years ago. The Landscape Board is looking at meeting with all stakeholders in relation to the little penguins, marine life and coastal care in this particular area. So it would say that your original email that went out, Andrew, Landscape Board has picked that up. It is part of our charter, part of our role. So there will be meetings held with all stakeholders, which will include council as well, to see exactly what the needs are, what you're looking
Sorry,
for.
councillor Schofield, can you please keep it to the motion?
Okay, well, the
at
motion
hand?
is that you're looking for support. Yeah, Landscape Board is prepared to give you that support, but there has been money put out.
Does anybody else want to speak in relation to the motion? Either of you on Zoom? Brian, is that your hand up? No? No. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Robertson, do you want to close the debate? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? Sorry, Councillor Littley, was that, can we do that again? All those in favour? Thank you. Those against? That's supported unanimously. And the last recommendation, that council appoint myself as the voting delegate and Deputy Mayor Hales as the proxy delegate for the Local Government Association ordinary. Move that way, Councillor Schofield. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Either of you want to speak to that? No. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now move to item 9.3, the proposed behavioural standards for council members. You may recall we had a workshop in relation to this. Kyla asked for feedback from any of the council elected members that wanted to provide feedback. She hasn't received any feedback. So what I'll do is there's the first recommendation, and we can go with either 2A, that we do not submit a formal submission, or if anybody does have any feedback that they want to give her, that 2B being council submits that feedback, which we'll need to give her tonight. So would somebody like to propose recommendation 1? Just one. Thank you, Councillor Robertson, and seconded Councillor Hales. So that's just receiving and noting. Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Someone like to propose a recommendation, either 2A or 2B? Councillor Robertson? 2A. Do I have a seconder for recommendation 2A? Thank you, Councillor Hales. And the recommendation is that we do not submit a formal submission. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The single-use plastics legislation, and I do know that Councillor Henderson, if I can just find it, Councillor Henderson has a would like to move recommendation 1, that we receive a note, and 2B. And do you want to read that 2B out, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. That council submits the following feedback. The City of Victor Harbor supports the implementation of the second phase of the City Products Act 2020, prohibiting the supply, sale and distribution of polystyrene items such as cups, bowls, plates and clamshell containers, and all oxo-degradable products, including some produce bags, pet waste bags, bin liners, magazine wraps, bags.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I'll just wait for that to be written up on the board Councillor Glasbrook,
Can I add something to that?
with Councillor Henderson, if you want to second it and add something with
No,
Councillor.
it's just Councillor Henderson has listed some materials. Can I add to that list?
If you'd like to.
Yeah. Well,
If she's fine with that as the mover.
well, the thing that I'd like to include, I think, I certainly class it as a single-use material is packaging. I think recently I've gone through the process of an extension, as people know. The amount of packaging that is provided is unbelievable. And it's a huge, polystyrene is by far the worst, and of course plastic bags. And I certainly believe that's a single-use product. I mean, you only use it once. So I think that the government needs to put in some sort of legislation in relation to limiting packaging or limiting it to at least recyclable materials. So if that could be included, I'd be very happy.
Are you happy for that, Councillor Henderson?
To be honest, I'm not sure. What I've read out is what the state government is already proposing with stage 2. I'm sure they'll have other stages, 3, 4, 5 onward. Hopefully that packaging, and I agree with Councillor Glasbrook, there is far too much of that. But I'm hoping the state government will address things like that also in the future. And I think to keep it simple, to just give them the feedback on what the information they've already put out there, I think I'd rather leave it as is with their wording.
Okay. Councillor Glasbrook, did you want to second that without that, or were you looking for an amendment to include that?
I'll amend it if the members are in favour of it.
Can I just check for a moment that we need to have a motion that has been moved and seconded before we do an amendment? I think we need a seconder before we can have an amendment, Councillor Glasbrook. Councillor Little, are you wanting to second that?
I am happy to second that and speak to that, if I may, before we progress any further.
I'm happy for that. So seconded by Councillor Little. Councillor Glasbrook, if you'd like to move an amendment for that after Councillor Little's spoken to it, we can go through that. Councillor Little, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just very quickly, and I guess I have the benefit of Councillor Glasbrook already speaking to it, but I'm in agreement of Councillor Henderson, and I think that Councillor Glasbrook's comments there are absolutely on the mark, but this is a government that has taken a lead in this space and is showing leadership in it. I think that we should be confident that we will reach that point that Councillor Glasbrook wants to, and this is another step in that path. They've done it very well so far, and I think that we can follow this path. That's a good, strong path to follow. So I'll support it. I'll also support an amendment if this one is lost.
We now have a motion. Councillor Henderson moving it and Councillor Little seconding it. Councillor Glasbrook, do you want to move an amendment to the motion?
Yes, please. This is only providing feedback.
So your amendment is?
That packaging is included in as a single-use plastic, and that government have some form of legislation or requirement to reduce.
Would you like one of the staff
plastic.
to help you?
Yeah,
with
or someone
the
have. I just thought we just include in the list as what Councillor Henderson had done.
Kathy, could you be a wordsmith?
Well, it's for everything, really.
I'll just ask Kathy Hayter to help you with that, and then I'll ask for a seconder for your amendment to see whether we go through. So just add packaging to Marilyn's. Yeah. So are you, Councillor Glasbrook, just a moment, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Glasbrook, are you happy with that, that amendment being including packaging being put on the end of Councillor Henderson's motion?
Yeah, look, I think that'll be better than nothing for sure. So yes,
So you
I'm
happy with that? All right.
Yeah.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? No, we've got a mover, second, you're seconding the amendment, Councillor Andrews? Then just go the Andrews and.
It's a day for getting the
Okay, can
brain
we?
twisted.
Well, can I speak to it? I have a right to speak to it. I might be able to talk someone into it.
Kelly, we're just about to vote on an amendment, so if you need to speak before that, Kelly.
Yes, please, if I can, through the Mayor. I just wanted to provide a bit of clarity on what the recommendation is actually asking. So the second phase, which includes those items that have been included in the recommendation up on the screen, prohibiting the sale and supply of cups, bowls, plates, clamshell containers, that's already passed and they will be prohibited in March. What this is about is asking what council or feedback council would have on future prohibited products. And so on page 58, the commentary there, there's a consultation paper which is part of your under separate cover listing plastic bags, single-use plastic cups, etc., and also other items such as bread tags and fruit stickers and confetti. So if we're wanting to submit feedback for consideration in the consultation paper for future products, that's what this recommendation was actually intended to be about, not so much the stuff that has already made it to the prohibited list that will be prohibited in March. So if councils were looking to either support the additional items that have been listed within the commentary and then add to that, that would be possible at this point to influence future legislation.
Thank you, Kathy. We have got an amendment that has been moved and seconded. We need to vote on the amendment. Yep, and Councillor Robertson seconded it. So all those in favour
But
of the amendment?
I had a question, Mayor.
No, you can't on an amendment, which is a formal motion. Can have questions.
It's nothing to do with the amendment, actually.
Just check that.
An amendment's different to a formal motion. A formal motion would be to adjourn or put motion to light.
You can debate an amendment. Yep. No, you're right. You can debate an amendment. So, Councillor Robertson, did you want to, Councillor Glasbrook, first of all, did you want to speak to your amendment?
Well, yes, I do. I just want to reiterate what I've said, and thank you very much, Kelly, for clarifying that. I did think that I read that somewhere, but I couldn't remember. Yeah, this is a huge issue. This is far, in my opinion, just worse than polystyrene cups and whatever. I'll use a simple example as a microwave. You go out and buy yourself a new microwave. There's this great big box, and at the bottom there's a huge polystyrene tray, which would be probably 100 or more cups. Then there's another one on the top. Then in there there's a microwave which is wrapped in plastic. Then the whole thing is wrapped in plastic, and then it's stuck in a box, and you end up getting this little tiny microwave that's this big, and you think, gee whiz, why didn't I buy myself a bigger microwave? So I think this is an enormous problem. The amount of waste that we're producing in packaging is horrendous, and I'd like something to be done about it. So I think this is a great initiative.
Councillor Robertson, do you want to speak?
Yes, Mayor, my original question was that I didn't realise that we had voted on the first recommendation.
No, we're doing that, the first recommendation.
Is
en
that
bloc
combined with this other one,
with-
is it?
With this other one. The first one is just receiving and noting the report.
Yeah, because when I had something to say about the report, and it sort of hasn't come up, and I was waiting for all the fire and brimstone to cool down. Because I had the single-use plastic legislation report motion. So can I just speak to that for a moment?
You'd be speaking to the amendment now. But we do have an amendment on the table. We will go back and receive and note it. I should have done that first. Beg your pardon, I
Yeah.
thought that we'd do that on block.
Okay.
But
Yep.
we'll speak, if you speak to the amendment now, we'll go back to number one.
Yeah.
And I do apologise.
No problem. So one thing that I would like to point out, though, is something that annoys me immensely. That table over there.
Please sit down, councillor Robertson,
Why?
because it's very rude to stand up. Please sit down.
Okay. On that table over there, we have plastic water bottles every meeting. Why don't we have glasses and jugs of water, or if regulations don't allow us to have jugs and water and you serve yourself, then we have a tray of water-filled glasses. Why do we, every meeting, have
Councillor
plastic
Robertson, I
water?
can understand your passion and I do think it's something we need to discuss, but I'd really like to be able to
I'll
keep,
take action on it, I think.
I'd really like to keep the discussion to the recommendation.
Yeah, well,
So we
I'll
have,
come back to my comments when we do the first bit, the recommendation.
so we are talking to the amended report, that we're only using single plastics. And does anybody else want to speak to the amended motion? Councillor Little, you have your hand up. You've already spoken to the original one, so you can only speak to the amended one if you haven't spoken to the original motion.
I had my hand up for about 5 different points ago. That's part beyond that. I was going to second that amendment.
Does anybody else want to speak to the amendment? Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I query whether the amendment achieves what Councillor Glasgow is trying. The information that Group Manager Mike Stacey, I think, including what Councillor Glasbrook was putting forward in its own dot point along the lines of that the City of Victor Harbor would also seek the future inclusion of packaging, which is single use as a prohibited product for supply and distribution in South Australia as a standalone point, would be a far more effective way of achieving the outcome that Councillor Glasbrook is looking to fulfil. As the amendment's been moved, I definitely can't tell anyone what to do with it, but I think that would be a more effective way of achieving that. We're all pushing in the same direction here anyway. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Does anybody else want to speak to the amended? If nobody else wants to speak to the amendment, Councillor Glasbrook, do you want to?
Can I
close
vary,
the debate?
I will vary the amendment, please,
You vary the amendment?
along the lines of Councillor Howes. I really just accepted the fact that the single word was because I didn't see the change in the meeting now. I think this is a big issue and I would like it to be a dot point to give it a little bit more
So
importance.
how would you like to amend it?
I'll take the wording that Councillor Hales had just mentioned.
I'm just wondering, through the Mayor, if you might be better off going back to the original motion. If that's still what Council wants to debate, you could then move another motion which achieves, so that you're not losing the original by amending it. And then we could have another motion from the floor along the lines of that wording to achieve the outcome that you're still wanting to achieve, which is providing that specific additional feedback.
Oh, thank you. I'll take your advice and I'll withdraw my amendment. Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that.
That's all right. We go back to the original motion, moved by Councillor Henderson, and I think that was seconded by Councillor Littley. Does anybody want to speak to the original
Just
motion?
a question, Mayor Jenkins, in relation to the withdrawal of the amendment. Just need to check that, do you need to seek the seconder of the amendment's approval to also have the withdrawal of it? Just in case it becomes an issue later on.
Councillor Robertson, you happy for that amendment to be withdrawn? Thank you. Does anybody want to speak to the original motion? Councillor Henderson, would you like to close the debate on your motion? No. In that case, then I will put it to the floor. All those in favour? Just waiting for Councillor Littley. Councillor, thank you. And those against? That's carried, thank you. Can we go back to the first recommendation? Just do that one because that was my mistake in not doing that first. Receiving and noting the report was some Sorry, Councillor Littley.
Mayor, I just need to tell the chamber that my computer is overheating and not taking battery power, and I may drop out, and I'd be a formal apology for that section of the meeting until I can get myself back online.
Thank you very much. Somebody moving that way, was that you, Councillor Schofield, and seconding that, Councillor Robertson? Either of you want to speak to the receiving and noting the report? No, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. I do, because I tried to read through this stuff here in the legislation and the background to it, and I'm just going, yeah. I wish I try, really hard to reduce the plastics that I put into the recycling bin, but we have this huge array of confusion related to, whether plastic wrapping is biodegradable or not, whether we actually recycle certain types of plastic or not. The whole business here, I can see where it's going. I'm 110% behind it. But, to me, it's something like the little things in life, like those plastic bottles in the corner of this room, that where you show commitment and you don't do it anymore. And when we get this stuff from the legislation from South Australia, I wonder we're not getting very far with this, because obviously what the supermarkets do is they're a law unto themselves. They have no intent or desire to, I only see more and more plastic wrapping, like Councillor Glasgow was talking about before, on everything that we always used to have as going in a paper bag, fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. And everything else individually wrapped in plastic, and we don't have legislate against what goes on in the local. I think it's terrible the way that we're forced because of inaction. But here we have this report we're supposed to read, which is talking about how marvellous things are going to be when actually. Anyway, so much of my gripe about. But I think we can start as a council by doing things like saying no more plastic water bottles in this outfit.
You may remember, I completely agree with you, Councillor Robertson. We glasses and water mugs. However, because of COVID and some of the rules with COVID, we've reverted to single-use bottles. But if people, and I see that a number of people bring their own drinking bottles and fill them up, if we could be encouraged to do that, that would be fantastic. So thank you very much. Does somebody else want to speak to receiving and noting the report? If not, I'll ask for a show of hands. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. I don't think Councillor Little is with us at the moment. Now, you had another motion in relation to that, Councillor Glasbrook. Would you like to move your motion? Oh.
I'm happy
moving
to
it.
provide to move it. Otherwise,
You can move it
Either way,
in
yeah.
a second. Yep.
so it's that the City of Victor also seek the future inclusion of packaging, which is single use, as a prohibited in South Australia.
What a wordsmith. Are you happy with that, Councillor Glasbrook? You happy to second that? You want to speak to that, Councillor Hales?
I think Councillor Glasbrook's put it succinctly enough. Bit of a blight. We should, yeah, if we're going through these steps as a state, that's the next natural one.
Fabulous. Councillor Glasbrook, did you want to speak to that anymore? Does anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. And Councillor Little, unfortunately, is still not here. Councillor Henderson, you wanted to say something? Councillor Henderson, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Given what, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Given that the first motion recommendation is almost redundant because, as was pointed out by Kelly Knight Stacey, that the government is already proceeding with that list of plastic items, and I think I'd like to move item 2C or 2D, whatever it happens to be, and include all of the bullet points on page 58, which is what they're looking at next. The 5 highlighted bullet points, followed by 8 smaller bullet points below, and basically use the same wording and say we support their move in that direction to abolish these particular plastic products.
We'll just get that written up so that the chamber can see it. I think what the chamber is showing is that it's very clear that environmental issues to the city and extremely important to all of the elected members. And I congratulate you. I think given, especially where we live, and we were talking about coastal issues, and we will be talking about them later on tonight, that, you know, we really need to keep our environment as clean as we possibly can. And we can be a leader in the field here in Victor Harbor in terms of being environmental warriors. And so I congratulate you much with this discussion, which I think is very, very important. Yep. 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 Are you happy? Can you see the screen there, Councillor Henderson?
I
can't?
don't have this shared screen in front of me.
If you have a look at page 58 of your agenda, what's been put on the screen is a copy and paste of from plastic bags
Yep.
all the way down to expanded polystyrene trays used for meat, fruit and other items for retail
Right.
sale.
That's exactly what I intended. Thank
It's
you.
exactly what you intended. Thank you.
Yep.
Do I Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Glasbrook. Do either of you want to speak to that?
Just to say that some of these things are totally ridiculous in my opinion. Why we need a sticker on every piece of fruit that we buy is just nonsensical. And I could go on, but no, I've said enough. Thank you.
You, councillor Glasbrook. Does anybody want to speak to that? Those in favour? And those against? That's carried unanimously. Yep. Yep, we're fine, good. So we now move to item 9.5, which is the Murray-Darling Association Region 6 call for nominations. And its recommendation is to receive the report. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, councillor Hales, and thank you, councillor. Do either of you want to speak to the report? Does anybody want to speak to the report? All those in favour for receiving the report? Those against? Thank you very much. That's carried. Now, I'd just like to ask, first of all, are there anybody interested in nominating for the chair or not? If there are none, that's all right. From this council. Going once, going twice? No? All right, we can move on. Yes. I'm not aware of any letter. Kelly's shaking her head. No, that's the correspondence that we would have received. We now move to item 10. The community and development. This item 10.1, Cancer Australia supporting people with cancer grant initiative. The circumstances have changed for that. Mr. McRae came and spoke to the Office of the CEO and asked whether or not this could be adjourned till the February council meeting rather than tonight. I just wonder whether, because we've got a recommendation down there, if somebody would like to make another recommendation that it is adjourned to the February council meeting. Thank you very much, Councillor Schofield, and seconded by Councillor Glasbrook. Do either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. So we'll look at that in February. My understanding is that there may have been other support that they are able to link into. There are no reports for council decisions from corporate and customer services. All right, we'll just wait for Katie and Correct to catch up. Yes, it was unanimous. 12.1, application for dedication over Crown land. The first recommendation is that council receive and note the application. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Hales, and seconded by Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to that report? Anyone want to speak to the report? All those in favour? And those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Recommendation 2. I'm not going to go through the names of all the parcels that are contained in that recommendation. I'll take it as read if somebody would like to move that way. Thank you, Councillor Hales, and seconded by Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? Thank you, that's carried. The Victor Harbour Community Recreation Centre Fire Service Audit. I'll do that recommendation en bloc. I think that's fairly simple. You're happy to move recommendation 1 and 2, Councillor Schofield? Thank you. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Hales. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, a couple of questions, if I might. In the audit, first it had 7 recommendations, and on page 102, 4 have already been done relating to doors and signage. The big ticket item that's coming up in the final 3 recommendations of the audit are supplying a large replacement tank and also a couple of minor elements. But I was wondering, because the council staff have done a very good job of looking into the easy part for the consultant who did the report was to say, oh, you've got to do this, that and the other thing. But the council staff have done a great job in terms of going in and looking at what was being proposed and how could we cut down the cost of it. But I'm wondering about this also in the sense that, yeah, there's a requirement for larger volumes of water, and that when either the MFS, hopefully CFS turn up, if there was to be large fire in the rec centre or any fire in the rec centre, that they would have plenty of water to put it out. And yeah, okay, so the regulations now mean that the 100,000 litres isn't big enough, and you need more. Okay, I buy that, even though I can't imagine why you need more, because we have connected up to the mains water supply there. That used to be a place to fill up, you know, CFS truck tanks. Yeah, it goes directly onto the mains. And okay, if there's additional water that's got to be supplied because you've only got, you know, 1 or 2 outlets coming from the mains, and you've got trucks to be filled up. So to me, there were 2 questions here. One was that why aren't we making better use of the main supply? But secondly, because of the costs involved in this and potential for you know, a change of use or ownership for this this facility, do we really need to go ahead with this? Because the talk about in the main part of the report says in there that there's that some of this stuff can be further put off. I hate to do that, especially when it comes to so-called safety issue, but there's a lot of language in here which tends to suggest that that items from middle of page 102, items 5, 6 and 7, water supply, the hydrants and the warning system are not time critical, as the existing fire water storage tank been in operation and current condition for a number of years.
Councillor Robertson, I'll ask Kathy if she can answer your questions. Kathy?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Robertson. In relation to the mains versus the fire tank, I'll have to take that one on notice, but I just did want to highlight that the recreation centre is council's responsibility, and any future use of the recreation centre, council has had some discussions in confidence, but it's still our responsibility currently and for the foreseeable future. So we need to act on these.
Yeah, and another question was, if I might, that the location of this larger replacement tank that I would hope that we would make that into a facility that we could use for, that would be useful for that area and be in a position that could be useful for that area as well. For instance, we could give the high school a swimming instead of a water.
Nice ideas. Is there any further discussion in relation to this recommendation on block? Councillor Schofield, do you want to close the debate? No. In that case, I'll put it to the floor. Councillor Littley, we're up to 12.2 if you're trying to catch up, and we're doing recommendation 1 and 2 on block.
I don't have the recommendations, I don't have the agenda in front of me, and I'll seek to stand out of this vote and then come back in on the next one so I can keep up, please.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. We're now moving to 3. Councillor Littley, can you see that, the Grantley Avenue level crossing? I can't hear you, you're on mute.
I'm just about to open my agenda. Thank you, Katie, for sending it to me because I couldn't access that because I can't get into my computer, but I'll be there soon. I'll be able to vote on this one, yes.
I'll read the recommendation out, Councillor Littley, just to make sure that you've got it. And this has come about since there was the unfortunate accident on Grantley Avenue with the Steam Ranger and a car that I think was parked on the crossing. So the recommendation, if we do that on block, the first one, that council receive and note the Grantley Avenue level crossing report. And the second recommendation is that council endorse administration working with Steam Ranger and undertaking the civil work required to convert the Grantley Avenue level crossing to an activated crossing at an estimated cost of $80,000 and to approve a 2021-2022 operating budget increase of $80,000. I might ask Kathy Kelly to speak to that motion, that recommendation, before I ask for a mover and a seconder.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I just wanted to provide an update on the dollar figures within there, because it is complex in terms of who owns the asset at the end of the works. We have been in discussions with our auditors to get their perspective, and there is potential for us to capitalise some of this amount, but we haven't yet been able to ascertain exactly how much. So in regards to the works, there's boring and trenching that's required for the actual lights themselves, which would be the operating component. But in terms of the basically reinstatement or making good of the road that may be dug up, we can potentially capitalise that. So whilst the recommendation is good as it stands, there will likely be a savings on that $80,000 once we work out exactly how much we can capitalise. So the 80 grand is the worst case scenario.
Thank you, Kelly. Would you prefer me to do that recommendation one at a time? Are you happy to do it on block? Question?
Can I just clarify, because I couldn't quite work it out from the agenda item. Are we talking flashing lights and a boom gate? Yeah, thank you.
No boom, just flashing lights.
So no boom gate, just flashing lights. Okay.
Mayor Jenkins.
Yes.
I need to declare a perceived conflict of interest in relation to this matter. As I rent a residence on this intersection, perceived conflict of interest is perceived in nature because it's an interest by the community, and I don't stand to gain or lose any material benefit out of it. I'll be dealing with this interest by staying in the chamber, participating in debate and voting on the matter.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hales. If you're happy to take recommendation 1 and 2 on block, I'll look for a mover. Thank you, councillor Schofield, and seconded by councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that, councillor Schofield? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have just a couple of questions, if I might, to begin with. Didn't quite hear before what Kelly said, but the activation that's being talked about in this $80,000, the first lot of 80,000, is that just lights? It's not a boom or warning bells and this sort of thing?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, councillor Robertson. That's correct. There are two different types of crossings, warning signals that it could be. This is an activated one, so no boom gates would be included in this. The $80,000 is just for the civil works associated with that. So the entirety of the project, including the signals, Steam Ranger estimate to be around $500,000. The actual signals and the rest of the work would be carried out by Steam Ranger and their volunteers or contractors that they've asked council to contribute to the civil works, which is the $80,000. So what Kelly said before was we're just speaking and getting advice from the auditors about how much of that $80,000 we might be able to capitalise, because there are components like the trenching and digging that we can't capitalise, but the reinstatement of the road as our asset, like the bitumising of the road, the sub-base as well, we may be able to capitalise. So that $80,000 we now expect to be the maximum, and it may be less than that.
Two further questions, if I might. Turning to page 118 and the little map up there, which shows the limiting access from Grantley Avenue, there's a orange strip in the middle there, which represents a water-filled barrier, which makes sure that the traffic coming out of Grantley Avenue cannot cross Hindmarsh Road. Is that included in the cost, as well as you note further up on that diagram that there's to be cancellation of the ability to turn right heading south on Hindmarsh Road to turn right into Grantley Avenue, and I presume that means that the slip lane there would have to be blacked out, and some of the other markings on the road coming from Bridge Terrace entering into Grantley Avenue before you cross, and when just after you cross the railway line, I presume, does that cost include rearranging all that line marking that's on the road?
Thank you. Through the Mayor. Thank you, councillor Robertson. So the temporary works there, like the water field barriers and the line marking, we can do within our existing operating budget. So we don't need additional funds for that. The actual look of the final design of that crossing will be subject to detailed design that will go through, that Steam Range will be responsible for. This is an interim temporary. Whether it stays depends on really the detailed design and whether it is thought that temporary measure will assist there as well. It may well stay, and then we'll need to look at it, but at the moment we can do those temporary works as an immediate piece of work to mitigate or at least reduce some of the safety risks within our existing budget.
Yes, but does that mean that because if you do put in these arrangements for limiting the use of the crossing there, that's the Grantley Avenue through to Bridge Terrace road crossing there, that a lot of the white markings will become redundant. They'd have to be removed, scraped off or painted over. Is that something we have to do, or is that something that the Steam Ranger has to do?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, as part of council's responsibility is as the road manager, Steam Ranger is the rail manager. So those road markings are our responsibility.
Yeah. Just the third question, the last one at this stage, is that further on in the agenda tonight, we have a proposal to bitumenize the eastern side of Hindmarsh Road from where is it? Somewhere up near, yeah, Brenown Avenue or something. Is it? No. Yeah. Anyway, is that one going to mean that that there would need to be also a pedestrian crossing put into, because the map that's showing in that item still to come up just shows the footpath ending at the railway crossing. Is that then going to be extended across to the cross over Grantley Avenue on the on Hindmarsh Road?
Thank you, through the mayor. So yes, you're right in relation to the potentially the new works there. So we've spoken both with the Department for Environment and Infrastructure and also the Disability Access and Inclusion, you might remember, are looking for an additional or a chicane that is more inclusive. So at the Grantley Avenue crossing there, subject to the detailed design and approval from all the relevant authorities, it may be that that we're able to put in an additional pedestrian crossing there that is hand cycle friendly. So, and depending then on the design, it may also be that coming from Mum's Beard Cafe as well, we may need another crossing there, but we need to look at the detailed design first. But yes, I take the point, and we do need pedestrian and or cycle crossings there. So that is part of the design that will also happen as in relation to the extension of the footpath stroke bicycle, and both the State Bicycle Fund and the department are aware of that and supportive.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Litterly, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I do have a question. To this question and potentially a comment, I suppose. I'm looking at the map that's drawn out here, and my eye is drawn to the orange stripe down the middle of the road there, which is a barrier to prevent turning right into into the crossing and across to Bridge Terrace. And also, I have a question about the exiting Bridge Terrace through that crossing to turn left there. Is there any change to how that operates, first of all, as a question? My second question is, what consideration has been given to the fact that the use of an area, that area of the beach down on Bridge Terrace, I use that where I take a horse float, so I'm towing a vehicle. I'm also aware that rescue boats or other boats, trailered boats, would be taken down there regularly because it's the Yacht Club and the Sea Rescue. There seems to be only now limited to putting it into our Main Street precinct and busiest intersections to be able to access Bridge Terrace and the Sea Rescue area and the like, the Yacht Club, with trailered vehicles from down on our foreshore area, which is already built up. Am I of the right thinking that that is what the outcome will be with that barrier in the middle there?
Thank you, through the mayor. Thank you, Councillor Lidley. So first, in relation to your question coming left out of Bridge Terrace. So that is the, coming out of Bridge Terrace and then through Grantley onto Hindmarsh Road. So this diagram is the temporary measure. The detailed design may actually include different kind of lane, like a longer or a slip lane to enable vehicles to more comfortably merge with the Hindmarsh Road traffic. So this is just the temporary measure until that detailed design and those works are done.
Is that coming from the Sea Rescue Squadron turning right into the crossing and then across that, or just if you're coming from the Kwawa end of the road turning left into that crossing?
That's correct. So there will be no right turn out of that crossing, if that's what you mean, onto Hindmarsh Road?
No, I mean from Bridge Terrace into the crossing, coming with a trailer vehicle or any vehicle for that matter, can you turn across from the right? It's not clear on the diagram whether you can turn right from where the croquet club is into that crossing, as you can do currently.
Yes, if I understand what you're saying, yes, you can still, what you won't be able to do from there is turn right out onto Hindmarsh Road from Grantley.
Yep. So that's the first part of my question. And then I guess my comment is, and I have concerns, I understand this is a temporary measure, but even temporary, and while it is a temporary measure, there will be many trailered vehicles with trailered boats, including sea rescue, that may need to access that part of the beach to perform rescues. Will they, if they're coming from, say, they have to come up from the Bluff boat ramp side of town because a rescue warrants putting in, and it can be achieved at the sea rescue squadron base out the front off the beach, they would have to go through either the McDonald's roundabout there and go over the railway line there anyway, and then turn there, or right through the centre of town, or right around the foreshore. And that's I have some concerns about the fact that there is no ability to right-hand turn into that in the case of an emergency. You'd have to, if anything, go up and do a hook turn up around the somewhere further along that busy road and come back to turn into that area without going through the town, or the CBD, I should say, Main Street. There's no other way of getting in there.
Is that a question, Councillor Littley?
Well, if I can get clarification that there is no other way of getting in there apart from those roads, that's my question. And beyond that, it's a comment that I have some concerns about that, because it is a matter of minutes.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. Yes, that's correct. So it will be through Eyre Terrace. And that was a recommendation of the 2017 Victor Harbour Town Centre Traffic Movement and Car Parking Strategy. So that was something that Council endorsed back in 2017. But yes, you are right in doing this. You will need to use an alternate route, including potentially the Eyre Terrace, the roundabout there at Seaview Road, and the Eyre Terrace crossing.
Thank you.
I'll close my comments and say then that I can't support that in its current planning, even as a temporary measure. Thanks.
Braden?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a question referring to the diagram again. So I'm struggling to understand why that right turn from Hindmarsh to Grantley is going to be blocked off, and as to why there's that need to. I don't see them crossing over the train tracks. So if you could speak to that as my first question. Thanks.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. Essentially, it's the stacking space there. There's not much, my understanding is there's obviously not much room there if you're turning right and before you get to the train line. So it's a way of minimising risk, essentially. So it's as in there's not much space for cars to bank up there.
Yeah. So is that to do with the train, or is that to do with just it's going to block some drivers coming down Hindmarsh?
Potentially both.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm still struggling to see. I guess. Yeah. Okay. I'll have to take. Just looking at it, the removal of that lane across the train track makes more sense to me. The removal of that slip lane going up Grantley Avenue away from the train track, I don't necessarily see the merit around that safety measure, but I'm not a traffic advisor. Also around whether, I guess sort of feeding in, still talking about this motion, but also the one that's to come next around the footpath. Just wondering the extent of what those designs, looking at this whole intersection would take into account as to a larger and separate slip lane where that footpath is meant to be coming down Hindmarsh Road on that left side before turning off down across the train track, and whether there is that scope to look at another slip lane to make that a safer turn if cars bank up and wait there. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. Yes, so through the detailed design of probably both projects, and potentially they could happen concurrently. Yes, we're looking at slip lanes both sides to see whether or not there is room there, but also how to make it safe for all users. So it will be part of the design. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Thank you, Councillor Hales, then Councillor Glasbrook. Councillor Robertson, you've spoken, so unless you've got a specific question. Have we got a phone going somewhere?
Outside.
It's an outside noise. It's very distracting.
I've got some questions in relation to this matter. The first one being, as the detailed temporary design, is that likely, if we proceed with this, to be the final design, the traffic movements, just with some added lights, signals? Or is it likely to change?
Thank you. Through the Mayor. Probably no way of saying it possibly could change it, and that will come down to the detailed design and the assessment of how much risk it actually mitigates leaving it like that, or whether the activated crossing itself is deterrent enough.
My second question is, in the report, it speaks to the matter of you need to deal with it up here, because if you just closed it right now, you would be pushing the traffic onto Eyre Terrace and other intersections that don't yet have the capacity because they also require bed upgrade works. So by doing, I guess, this lot of works, are we just putting off the other upgrade works that we have also kind of identified need to be done down at Eyre Terrace?
Thank you. Through the Mayor. So the Eyre Terrace, you're right to some extent, I guess. The Eyre Terrace and the Seaview Road roundabout and the Eyre Terrace crossing there will likely need work as well in the future. So they were slated to have work done to them in the event that Anchorage goes ahead or the McKinley Street car park. The Eyre Terrace and the roundabout there on Seaview Road, obviously that's a much more costlier initiative. It is, and there are safety concerns there as well in terms of sightlines, so there would be other issues to take into place, and also DIT is the approving authority on that roundabout, so we'd also have to go through a process, an approval process there, and this one, council is the approving authority because it is our road and we are consulting with DIT and seeking their advice. The other project may need to happen longer term, see with the growth of the city, and that is DITS, because it would be on DITS Road, and then obviously with the Eyre Terrace crossing, that would be for us to consider as well with Steam Ranger and DIT.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Glasbrook, you wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you. I'm a little bit along the lines of Councillor Hales. I personally believe that what we should be trialling is closing, just closing this road. In the report that come from Steam Ranger, that was their preferred option, is to close the road. You know, I come around that corner tonight specifically. I go around there often, and I already knew, but I wanted to just make sure. I can't see how that corner coming, you know, from the Clynix Hill way, or either way, turning right into that intersection could ever be safe. There's not the stacking space, as Director Hayter just called it. So long term, I don't believe that the feasibility of that intersection is there. I think, you know, we're looking at spending $80,000, which I know is not probably significant in the big picture, but when you hear that the Steam Ranger are potentially going to be spending $500,000 or maybe more, I think that we should be putting those funds into Eyre Terrace, putting a signal operated boom gate There's width on that road to make it wider, so we can have, you know, more lanes. I think we're just sending good money after bad, personally. So my recommendation would be, and I probably won't vote for this recommendation, would be as a short-term trial, just block Grantley Avenue, just block it off entirely. We've passed the worst of our tourist season. You know, it will upset a few people down on Bridge Terrace, and you know, a few people from the Sea Rescue. You know, of course, there's going to be side effects, but I think that'll stop 100% any risk of further accidents on that intersection. And you know, do it properly, do it once, is my opinion. If we have to bring forward Air Terrace, there's, you know, we might have to cut out some other projects or whatever, but I think this has become a priority, and let's just do it properly. That's my opinion. So I don't think I will support this. I support Steam Ranger 100%. I'd imagine that $500,000 is a significant amount of money to them. So that's what I would be doing. Close the road, call it a trial, allocate some money into Air Terrace and fix the problem long term.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Councillor Lidley, you've got a question. You've already spoken. Before you do, I was just wondering whether or not if somebody wanted to amend this so that we could actually have a workshop and talk with Steam Ranger and the engineers, that might be an option for members to consider. In the meantime,
I have a motion, Mayor. I have a motion to adjourn the motion, adjourn the debate, and go back and take a look at this a bit more closely. The report that's been done in response to an accident, which is only, I'm sure there are other options, and Councillor Glasbrook, you might have some of those. That's fair, but I don't think that we should be doing any action in an accident. I'm not aware of too many accidents there in my time. That one was, you know, no accident's a good accident, but I just think that we should adjourn the motion and go back and have adjourn this and go back and have a bit more look at some of the next meeting.
So you're putting in a formal motion that the question be adjourned? Motion
Yes.
be adjourned?
Yep. Yeah.
Yep. Do I have a seconder for that formal motion? Councillor Robertson. Can we vote on the formal motion? All those in favour of adjourning the motion? Those against? That's carried. So this motion is adjourned. And I wonder whether or not the staff could please organise a briefing, perhaps at the next CASPAC, so that we can discuss it further. And perhaps if Steam Ranger can also come, when we can also hear their perspectives and we can talk a lot more about that, because I think it's a very important topic and has long-term implications for transport in our town. We now move to 12.4, which is the update on the state bicycle funding for the Encounter Bikeway project. I'll do the recommendation one by one. The first one is that council receive and note the update. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Councillor Robertson, and seconded by Councillor Hales. Do either of you like to speak to that? Anyone like to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 2, that's grant funding reallocation. Council endorsed the construction of a shared path along Hindmarsh Road from Bond to Grantley Avenue as detailed in the report. Would someone like to move that way? If nobody wants to move that way, it will lapse for want of a mover. You have to move that way, Councillor Hales.
Just a question in relation to this motion, given that it was fairly heavily implied that it's tied.
Sorry, it's really difficult
Sorry,
to...
it's tied to the previous motion that we've adjourned. Is it thoroughly linked, or is it completely separate in terms of
Can you
outcomes and delivery.
perhaps answer that, Kathy?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, it can be extricated. Yes, so the design for this one can certainly take into account what happens with the crossing.
And just on top of that, there is a kind of a time impetus in relation to this due to the nature of the funding, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, yes, this funding, and we've checked with the funding body, needs to be spent ASAP.
Yep, it's this financial year. That being the case, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Littley, thank you very much. Would you like to speak to this, Councillor Hales?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'll keep it brief, but basically I definitely agree with us finishing off the footpath network in this particular area. If we look at this main road through Victor Harbour between the two rivers, both sides of it have a footpath except for the area identified in this report. It being a major transit corridor, that includes more than just cars, and therefore I think it is part of a footpath network that should have been built probably a long time ago, but would be great for it to be built now. So happy to move this one.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Littley, would you like to speak to the motion? Oh, no. Does anybody else want to speak to it? Councillor Glasbrook?
Well, I'm going to speak against it. I think we need to allocate this money to the Bridge Terrace section of footpath, the bike path that had been approved and then unfortunately got canned, and that's the part from the chicane through down to the yacht club that has already been planned and several times.
I might ask Kathy to speak
well,
to that.
I'd like to finish speaking to it first, if I could, please.
Sure.
I believe that we need to try and keep our pedestrians and our cyclists off of the main road. Get them onto the bike track. You know, you have to come across the bridge there to get across from the Clynings Hill end. You go through the chicane onto the bike track and down into Victor. Keep them away from this busy road, rather than encourage them to use it. That's what our bike track is supposed to be for. So I would be in favour of this money going towards that section of Bridge Terrace.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. I might ask Kathy to respond to that because I believe that we'd put that on hold. That was exactly the conversation I'd had with her earlier on.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. So you're right, Councillor Glasbrook. I believe that Bridge Terrace was consulted on a couple of times at least. So the detailed design was done you might recall, during last year's budget and long-term financial plan and asset management plan discussions. The Chamber determined not to continue with that, and there were a few discussions around why. Obviously, there was some community objection to it, and that potentially there was the other development happening in that space, like potentially the Eastern Beach boat ramp or boat landing facility there, and so that the actual construction of the Bridge Terrace section was withdrawn from the long-term financial plan, so it's not in the 10 years, with the exception of the chicane, the Bridge Terrace chicane, which is still in there and still intended to be constructed.
Thank you, Kathy. Did that answer your queries, Councillor Glasbrook?
Oh, well, it answers my query. I still don't agree with it. I think that it's a far better option than encouraging people to walk along this section of road. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson?
It takes a while to unmute. I have to agree with Councillor Glasbrook. I don't believe heavy traffic and cyclists and pedestrians are a good mix. And regardless of how well we do this shared pathway, it is still next to a major road, which is becoming busier by the day almost. And I would much rather prefer to have that funding put towards Bridge Terrace development. I really would like to see that come back into our 10-year plan. I think that's the only sensible way for for pedestrians and cyclists to move through that area. It's the safest way. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, how soon does that funding need to be used? And if we don't use it within that time, do we lose it or can it be put towards another project?
Thank you, through the mayor. So we have already sought the permission in principle from the State Bicycle Fund, so through DIT, to reallocate that funding. So any decision of chamber, we need to take back to the funding body to see if they're willing to, because it's a 1-for-1, it's 150,000, 150,000. So we would need to go back to the funding body and ask their permission. So they have some fairly particular criterion around what their 150 can and can't be used for. That's not to say that they might not support Bridge Terrace, but we would need to go back and ask them. And we need to spend the money by June. They may give us an extension if we ask, but the funding agreement is that the money will be spent by June this year.
Thank you. Councillor
Yeah.
Little, you've got a question. You spoke.
No, I would like to withdraw my seconding of the motion. Councillor Glazebrook has made a very good point, and through the channels of Zoom meeting, I agree with him. I'd like to withdraw my. It's a bit hard to keep up with some of the things. I'd like to withdraw my seconding of that motion.
Okay, do we have another seconder for the motion? We don't have a seconder. Happy to second that, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mann, you haven't spoken to this at all. Would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, considering the views expressed around the chamber, I think I'm not opposed to this footpath being installed along High Marsh Road. I think there is still the need for that area. Currently, there's footpath on the other side, which, as you can see in the documentation, there's about 4 roads that you have to cross, and which aren't necessarily the safest roads to cross. I think it's the Bridge Terrace, when we did visit that and visited that quite thoroughly, it was that difficult decision, and there was a lot of different voices and concerns around that. And I've got concern about us being able to pick up those discussions again, and also meet the deadlines required for this grant funding. I think it's something that we've discussed, and through our long-term financial plan, which we spent a lot of time revisiting, and we spent a lot of time looking at our budget allocations, and we put that outside of our 10-year plan for that road. So I think we need to be considerate of those thorough discussions we had around what our strategic projects were for. I know this footpath that's been included wasn't necessarily on that identified one, but I think there's still that need for it. And I would be interested for this footpath to go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Schofield, you're probably one of the few people that haven't spoken. Did you want to speak to this at all? No. Councillor Hales, does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Hales, do you want to close the debate?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I certainly hear what my fellow elected members are saying in relation to Bridge Terrace. And while council did make a decision last year or a while ago in relation to that, more than happy to revisit those discussions. But I don't think that that rules out the need for this footpath. If you look at pedestrian and people movements, the thing called desire lines, people are going to walk wherever they can see a path, whether there's a footpath there or not. And this is one of those stretches where they don't care that there's not a footpath there, so they're happy to walk along the dirt, or more often than not, the railway track in this particular stretch. As Councillor Mann identified, the other side of the road, you have to cross a number of intersections at which there's local traffic pulling up at speed, which also provides a bit of a challenge for pedestrians. So while absolutely the Bridge Terrace side of things is, I guess, more of a showpiece footpath, this one's still very much needed and would be very much appreciated by the community that are using this area anyway, and would in fact make it safer and bring them out of the way of harm. more than they currently are, which I guess was the impetus of the previous motion as well. So I would ask election members to reconsider their votes in relation to this matter, because this footpath definitely has merits of its own. It's not an either or with Bridge Terrace.
Thank you. That closes the debate. And we have had that recommendation on block. So it wasn't on block. Great. Beautiful. I'll now put recommendation 2 to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now come to item 13.1. Minutes of council meetings, and the first recommendation is that council receive and note the Fleurieu Regional Community Services Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Hales. Seconded, Councillor Schofield. Either of you like to speak to those minutes? Anybody like to speak to them? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Southern Communities Transport Scheme Advisory Committee minutes. Recommendation, council receives and notes. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson. Seconding that, thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to them? Does anybody want to speak to them? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The subsidiary and representative reports for January. The recommendation is receiving and noting the reports. Moving that way, Councillor Robertson.
Just declaring a conflict of interest here on in 14.1 on the report on the live arts at Newland, but my response to that's going to be a perceived conflict of interest, and I won't be speaking to or voting on the remaining in the chamber.
Thank you. Would someone like to move that the council receive and note the representative reports? Thank you, Councillor Hales. And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Schofield. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say about the reports? Councillor Henderson.
Just to let my fellow elected members know, I've been re-elected to the Australian Coastal Councils Association.
Oh, congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
Any further comments in relation to the reports? All those in favour? Those against? The Fleurieu Regional Aquatic Centre Authority Budget Review. The first recommendation is that council receive and note the report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Hales. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mann. Do either of you want to speak to receiving the report? Does anybody want to speak to receiving the report? In that case, all those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The second recommendation is noting no changes to constituent council contributions required as part of one, the Fleurieu Regional Aquatic Centre. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Speak to that. Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook.
I'll just ask a question, if I could, please. On page 171 or 170, probably on the paper, the actual recommendation from the board was that there was no amendment to the contribution from constituent councils at this stage, which quite clearly says that probably at some other stage there will be. Is the authority taking any steps or putting any measurements into place to, maybe mitigate some of these issues that they've been going through.
We'll need to take that on notice. Councillor Glassbrook. Oh, Kelly can answer it. Kelly can answer it. Kelly?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Just some additional commentary. The second quarter budget review will be going to the board shortly, but it has gone through the FRACA Audit and Risk Committee. And so in terms of that, the comment about no additional contributions at this stage, the Audit Committee has requested further information on that and what the board is looking to do in terms of any potential shortfall in their funding by the end of March. So it was asked to be provided by the end of the third quarter, so that we can give council some. There's a couple of options that the Audit Committee recommended the board could consider, including asking council for the contribution, using some of their surplus funds to look after their deficit and their cash flow. So they're looking to have a look at it in terms of the budget itself. And also a recommendation was made around the particular issues that FRACA is facing at the moment, which has been severely impacted by COVID, with lots of restrictions and changes happening in place. So they are faced with lower ticket sales, essentially lower participation at this point in time, because it's been so challenging over the past few months with Omicron. But yeah, the Audit Committee has asked for further information on that, and we would hope to have that come through after the board's considered it at the next time we bring a budget review to council for consideration.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, well, it does, yes, and thank you very much for that. The only issue with that is, of course, is when, by the time March gets here, it's all too late anyway. Can something be done prior to that?
Through the Mayor. So the Audit Committee basically made that recommendation to the board, but emphasised in terms of telling for council's budget also we don't like big surprises near the end of the year. So the board, the members that are on the Audit Committee, members of the board as well, took that as an understanding to take back for discussion at the next board meeting. So I would hope something may come out of that, but I can't promise that, not being on the board.
Are there any further comments to recommendation 2? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. We now have the mayoral report and receiving a note. Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and thank you, Councillor Schofield, seconding that. Does anybody have any questions in relation to the mayoral report? I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Elected member reports. Once again, there are no elected member reports. We move on to item 16, matters of urgency, and you should have got a motion that came through from Graham Pathouse in relation to the Street Art Space Visitor Centre opening hours. Has everybody got a copy of that? Came through late. It is now on the public agenda if people in the gallery wanted to have a look at it. But I take it that you've all got it. You've got it, Marilyn and Brian? Yep. So the first recommendation is that council receive a note. Would somebody like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Schofield. Do either of you have any questions or any comments in relation to receiving and noting the report? Does anybody have any questions or comments in relation to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. I might just ask Graham Pathouse to elaborate on the 2 recommendations that are there, and if you have any, you may be able to answer them before I go to looking for someone to move either 2A or 2B.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, Even just in the last couple of weeks, there's been a shift within the Coral Street art space that's also serving as our visitor centre in terms of our volunteers that are a bit reluctant or reticent to serve in that space for good reason at the moment, around COVID-related health concerns that they have for themselves, but also for others as well. Certainly, it's not that we're short of volunteers. They're still offering to do all sorts of things to help and support, but not so much at a face-to-face, at that interface, the public interface. Happy to work on things where they can from home, help with little projects. So it's increasingly becoming difficult to meet the service standard, essentially, of being able to support the visitors that come into the centre with enough volunteers and staff together to meet and greet, to serve the customers, to do the things that we need to do to keep the centre running and to provide a good ongoing service. So it's left us with a couple of options. One of those options is to reduce the hours that we provide the service. We do acknowledge that that's a reduction in service standard though, but also the ability not to provide a decent service is a reduction in service standard as well. So in order for us to be able to continue in the space and to provide a level of service, we see that there's one of two options really. One is to either reduce the hours that we're open for so that we can tailor it to the capacity of volunteers and staff that we have, or the other option is to inject some more staff resource in to compensate for the shortfall that we have in volunteers at the moment. So sorry about the lateness of the report, but it is becoming a little bit urgent. So we've put together those two options for council to consider tonight. Happy to take any questions on it.
Councillor Glasbrook.
Yes, thank you. Has the demand dropped off in the last few weeks? I know it was busy over Christmas, but it does seem to have quietened down substantially. So is there still a demand?
Yes, anecdotally, I've asked that question as well, and the demand has dropped off a little bit. I don't have the data or the figures for you, but certainly it's been reported back that there's been a significant drop-off, as you'd expect that as the summer season comes to a close. This time of the year, it's interesting. Traditionally, we've had less families once for obvious reasons, once the schools go back and the holiday season's over. Usually around February is when the grey nomads start up again and start making their way around the place. Many of those either.
You may be on mute.
Yeah, it just takes a while to get to the agenda. Yes, my question was similar. Yes, have change in the numbers of using space, given that we're now coming to the end of the school holidays and the busy holiday season. So, yes, that was my question.
Thank you. I think Graham might have answered that. I'll ask somebody to move one of those recommendations.
I'd like to move 2B. Yeah.
You'd like to move
2B to reduce the hours.
Yep, 2B. Thank you.
Yes, 2B.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. So 2B, Council grants delegation to the Chief Executive Officer up until the 30th of June to adjust operating hours at Coral Street Art Space / Victor Harbour Visitor Centre till such a time as the volunteer capacity is sufficient to recommence usual operating hours. Moved by Councillor Henderson, seconded by Councillor Glasbrook. Do either of you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I've chosen that option because it doesn't have the same budget impact. And I think it's also the safer option. If we reduce the number of hours, we reduce the risk of people being exposed to the COVID-19 situation. Besides that, I think we have done extremely well to date, given the COVID situation over the last couple of years, offered a continued service in many areas, including the Coral Street Art Space and visitor experiences, visitor information services. And, you know, many other businesses have reduced their what they're offering to their customers. And I think for a short period of time, reduce the hours and not impact our budget too much at the same time.
Thank you. Councillor Glasbrook? You don't want to speak? Does anybody else want to speak to this? Not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's a unanimous decision. Thank you. Questions on notice? Nil. Questions without notice? Nil. I think you've got a question without notice. I thought you had a motion without notice later on. Both?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. No, I do have a question on note without notice. And my question is that, can we please receive an update in relation to the stakeholder and community engagement that was to progress the development of a regional community?
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Hales. Yes, elected members may be aware that we've had a recent resignation of the staff member who was to lead that consultation. We've just completed an expression of interest to replace that staff member and completed interviews on Friday. So I'm hopeful that we'll soon be appointing someone, and we still intend to kick off the consultation in February. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion. The first recommendation is that Council receive and note the motion on notice report. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And do I have a seconder for receiving? Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to receiving the report? No.
No.
Does anybody want to speak to receiving the report? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Henderson, would you like to propose your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My motion is that elected by evidence of being fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by 27 January 2022, in line with Council's COVID-19 vaccination policy as it applies to all employees.
Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In early January 2022, a COVID-19 vaccination policy was introduced for council workers by the acting CEO, following 2 rounds of consultation with both staff and volunteers. However, this doesn't apply to elected members, as we are not employees. So, in my opinion, this leaves a bit of a loophole. However, I believe that as we are part of the council team, we have a responsibility to do the right thing by our colleagues, council staff and the volunteers, and keep them all safe. That's why I brought this motion to the table. I think we can make a responsible decision to do the right thing and make sure we're suitably vaccinated and keep our working community as safe as we possibly can.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Are you seconding that, Councillor Littley?
I am, but I did want some clarification in around the wording of the motion, but I am happy to support it, but I just wanted to get some clarification in regards to fully vaccinated, whether that is how we regard fully vaccinated with it, but that there's double vaccination is what is the norm, but of course there is the booster that is brought into play now, and whether if it's drawn that fully vaccinated, is two shots. If I can get an answer on that.
I'll just ask Karen to respond in line with the policy that the council has.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, the COVID vaccination policy that applies to employees does reference both the double vaccination as well as boosters. It has the ability that as boosters become a requirement to meet other certain schedule requirements of vaccination, that would apply to staff as well, where those positions are required to be fully vaccinated. So as I read this motion before you, the intention of it, if it's to align with what is in place for staff, which is what it's saying here in line with Council's COVID vaccination policy, that would also relate to boosters. It's designed to be somewhat future-proof because we're not sure what the vaccine schedules will require in future.
Am I able to therefore ask for a slight amendment or see if Councillor Henderson would be agreeable with a slight amendment that it is limited to double vaccination, because the state of play, the status with boosters has changed, has been very fluid since that council policy was put down for staff, in that the timing of when you get your booster, and also depending on when you got your vaccination, can't be met in the immediate future. So can we put some clarification around it that it is double vaccination? Of course, hopefully that continues on into the booster and the regime of that individuals can do themselves.
So you're asking Councillor Henderson to change that fully vaccinated to double vaccinated by the 27th of January?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any other framework we can put to, and then to follow the regime in line. I don't know, but it's different. It's going to be different for every person still, depending on when they got their vaccinations.
Councillor Henderson, are you happy for that to be double vaccinated by 27th of January?
And I understand completely where Councillor is coming from. I chose the word fully vaccinated because that was more inclusive. Fully vaccinated, as Councillor Whitley has pointed out, is a moving target, depending upon your age group and your qualification for vaccination. So I'm happy to go to double vaccinated, yes.
And you're happy to second that motion, Councillor Whitley?
I am, yes.
Thank you. Did you want to speak to that at all?
I will, thank you. Yep. I think this is a very, very strong move. As someone who's in quarantine as COVID positive, and as a double vaccinated person who was meant to get their booster shot on my return on Thursday, I'm all in support of this. I'd actually taken the council staff policy as that it did apply to myself, as I draw a wage from council, and I count myself as part of the team, and I think that it would be suitable to do that. And in fact, this week I've experienced questions from the public about my vaccination status, and I was of the assumption that I was working under the policy of council anyway, and therefore that information was available to public. So I've made no bones about my vaccination status. I've promoted it heavily. But I thought that it was a consideration of that all elected members were already double vaccinated, otherwise we wouldn't be in the public setting, because we, by all accounts, staff or part of the staff team.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Does Councillor Littley? I'm looking at one word here and looking at somebody else on the screen. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add, or any questions in relation to that motion? Councillor Glasbrook?
Well, just for the record, I won't be supporting this my personal opinion is that we shouldn't enforce people's vaccination choices. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
There any further discussion? Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a question really around the wording of this motion again, given that it is a sensitive issue. That last bit that it says as it applies to all employees, Local Government Act clearly draws that line between elected members and employees. I'm just wondering if the fact that the way it's worded here might be inferring that this is an appropriate thing for elected members to be doing because it's a policy that applies to all employees, which isn't the case in regards to us. I totally agree with the sentiment behind it and think it's right, but I just think that there could be some confusion around that.
Have you got a suggestion for a change of wording?
No, I don't. That would be too helpful, wouldn't it?
Would, rather than in line with Council's COVID-19 vaccination policy as it applies to employees, that was changed to consistent with? Does that clarify that for you, or is that too much the same?
I think the in-line part's not the bit I have issue with. It's the as it applies to all employees is the issue. So maybe, yeah.
Could you leave that that last line if the mover and the seconder are happy with the variation? Stop the motion after January 2022. Sorry? Oh, sorry, stop it after vaccination policy.
What the Mayor just said was probably the most succinct way of putting it, in regards to if the full stop was after January 2022.
I'll just ask the mover and the seconder if they're happy to vary the motion, because it needs to come from them, in relation to stopping the motion after January 2022.
I think it makes more sense to full stop after in line with COVID, the council's COVID-19 vaccination policy, full stop. I'm happy to stop it there.
I agree with that. I know the sentiment from Councillor Henderson is that we are in support of the council. We regard ourselves as a team. I'm happy with Councillor Henderson's proposal.
So you're both happy to vary the motion so that it finishes at vaccination policy full stop?
Yes.
Just clarifying that?
Yes.
Is there any more discussion in relation to this, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. It's because of the way this is worded. My major concerns are in the third one, but they should be addressed here. Why are we just putting in elected members here? Because we have large numbers of people in the community also who come along to this this civic centre here to attend meetings and including council meetings and so on. So if the intent is to stop the spread of COVID, double vaccination doesn't ensure that you're immune from spreading COVID and having it. So I'm fully on board with the intent of what's required here in terms of I'm double vaccinated. I don't have a problem letting people know that. I'm triple vaccinated with a booster as well. But you know, we're just singling out the elected members here, but you know, down in item 3, which we've yet to come to, but if we don't deal with it now, in item 2, you know, what is the intent of this thing? Is it to catch people who haven't or don't want to be vaccinated, or is it to reduce the spread? Because if it's to reduce the spread, maybe what the council needs to do is to say, well, council is in fact a whole series of events, and whether you're in here to pick up a library book or attend a meeting, that then you can't come in unless you show evidence of double vaccination.
I think, Councillor Robertson, that the intent is related to elected members as being part of the council and the organisation. All of the community, when they are in here, need to abide by the COVID safe practices that the council and indeed the local government association have put into place. They need a QR code in, wear masks, keep distances, all of those sorts of things that we are implementing. But this proposal from Councillor Henderson is related to our role as an elected member.
Yeah, well, that may be so, Mayor. I mean, I asked the question to Councillor Henderson and Littley. You decided to answer it, but what's the point of this? Because really, if you're just saying that to elected members, I also regard myself in terms of that employees. I mean, I get paid an allowance. It's not a salary, an allowance to be an elected member, and I regard myself as part of the council, the larger council as such. And I have no problem handing over my double vaccination or triple vaccination certificate, evidence. But, what are we trying to do here? We come to the third one, and this is that if elected members don't do that by that date, we haven't come to discuss it, but I'm ready to do that. But all I'm saying here is there are a bunch of people who come into this building here, if the objective of all of this is to reduce the transmission of the disease, then we ought to be making the place a double vax entry. But
I'll just let Councillor Henderson respond to you.
Yes, if I may respond here. I limited this to elected members because we can make a choice ourselves to do the right thing by the council employees and ourselves and keep all of that group of people safe. Council employees, the other elected members. We don't have the legal authority to determine what the members of the public have to have or not have in terms of vaccination when they come into the chamber or into the council offices. We don't have that legal right, but we do have the legal right to determine what we ask of ourselves, and that's what I'm doing with this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Hales, you've spoken on this. Have you got a question?
Yes, Mayor Jenkins. Just in relation to what Councillor Henderson just said in regards to legal rights in relation to what council can and can't do. Is she correct in stating that council does not have the ability to prohibit the general public from perhaps doing something or going somewhere based on vaccination status if they can access that service or opportunity through an online or another format?
I'll just ask the acting CEO to respond to that. Councillor Hales.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, we do have the ability to provide policy in relation to how we provide our services. That can require evidence of vaccination status. I would rather get some further legal advice on that before we implemented it, but certainly I'd be happy to look further into that if that was the appetite of the chamber.
Are there any further comments in relation to recommendation 2? If not, I'll put recommendation 2 to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. And recommendation 3, Councillor Henderson, would you like to move that one and speak to it?
I don't need to speak to it. It's all there. It follows on from item 2. So I'm sure all the elected members have read that.
Councillor Littley,
I'll second it.
you second it? You want to speak to it?
Oh, only that I think that it's a good move, and it's for me. This is about messaging to our public as well. We do have the option as leaders in the community to have a voice and to show what we're doing. I have no qualms in doing my vaccination status and encouraging other people to get double vaxxed or get their full vaccination. And I think it's a good message from this council to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Would anybody like to speak to recommendation 3? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I mean, I think this is completely over the top. I mean, if the, I have no doubt that, I don't know all the elected members really all that well, but I would be surprised if there's any anti-vaxxers in here. And this sort of stuff in here is that, by extension, if you say all this stuff, if no evidence is applied, then they are not, by an elected member, they are not to attend at this building here. And will be required, so they're not to attend here. Who's going to check that? Someone that doesn't come in here and say, well, you're going to give out evidence to the front desk to say, oh, councillor so-and-so is not to be allowed into the centre. You're not allowed to let them in. And then if they're going to be excluded from meetings and they have to attend by Zoom meetings, does that mean that, oh, well, you know, you're on Zoom meeting, the reason given that you're an excuse for the, that you're an apology for the meeting, I should say, or, oh no, he's an anti-vaxxer or something. Do you want to get involved in that level of you know, intrusion into what people are up to? I mean, to me, what are we trying to prove here? I mean, because I just can't imagine what's going on here. You know, all the bureaucratic stuff that has to be gone through, you know, or until the current emergency management declaration expires, whichever is the earliest. So what? I mean, isn't that good enough just to say, and I supported the first, no, I didn't because of another reason, but you know, if the people got vaccination policy, I'm certainly going to do mine handed in. But all this other stuff here, what are we trying to do here? It's taking up time.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak to Councillor Henderson's recommendation? If not, I will put it to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. It is 8 o'clock, and so we will take a 10-minute break and come back here at 8:10. Thank you. I do believe that Councillor Hales has got a motion without notice that you did give us some notice for, but was too late to put in the agenda. So we're doing it under this motion.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I do have a motion without notice that I did provide to members everything except for the last dot point last Wednesday, either way, almost a week ago. It didn't get into the agenda because of confusion about what the sequence of and whatnot. But that said, we're here. My motion is that council administration explore for the installation of signal associated pedestrian crossings at the intersection of Adelaide Road and McCracken Drive, and that a report be brought back by the March council meeting, investigations to include, but not limited to, speaking with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport about their appetite for such improvements and whether they would grant in principle agreement approval for the upgrade, take into consideration the upgrades due to occur at McCracken Country Club and the associated traffic implications such as the higher volume of caravans and RVs through the intersection, what budget requirements there would be for the upgrade works, to include the consideration of developer, state government and any other possible funding contributors. And the last one, which is new, is that the Chief Executive Officer, as well as local candidates for upcoming state and federal elections regarding the relation to this matter and seeking bit of text. As in my preamble that I emailed out to members, this is a concern that's been raised with me through a couple of young families that live in the Hayborough area, as well as one that I've become familiar with having lived in Hayborough myself and attending church and the like up there, seeing the issues that are created around Adelaide Road and the inability. It's a wall of traffic, just like that road is generally through the whole of the town. But as I outlined, one particular example of this was one young mum who literally lives 2 streets away from Coles, but because of Adelaide Road, she needs to put the 2 kids in, or 3 kids in the car in order to get across it, because taking the pram, trying to cross that road is just not an option. You end up waiting there for far too long. And this is just one example of, I'm sure, many, in terms of the fact that often we've had a very car and traffic approach to how we develop our towns and our cities. And the fact is that if we are trying to push people to make healthier options, to walk the 50 metres rather than having to turn the car on twice in order to go to the shops and come back again, we need to be making it actually move around that foot. And maybe this will cause some difficulty for traffic as such, but I don't believe that what we're looking at investigating in this area will be a disaster in terms of traffic. In fact, it also has some positive traffic outcomes potentially related to the developments that are due to commence up that side of town regardless. So yeah, I would definitely seek your support in pursuing this. It's a consultative approach to this. I've discussed it with Director Hayter in relation to how's the best way to tackle it. And by providing that leeway to seek an investigation to be brought back either in February or March, depending on time, we can have a look at what the potential solutions might be and what some budget figures and the like would look like around said solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for this? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Would you like to speak to this?
I have a question. Yeah, I think to Director Hayter, if I could, but my understanding since I responded to Councillor Hales's motion without notice was by email, was that at the time of the construction of that Adelaide Road section, that the City of Victor Harbor actually laid conduit in the ground for directly this particular crossing issue, but not as far up as the entrance to McCracken, but rather down towards the actual intersection roundabout. My understanding is that City of Victor Harbor laid the conduit for an anticipated pedestrian crossing out just outside of that roundabout, which I suppose will probably be several car lengths away from it because wouldn't want traffic backing up onto the roundabout. But is that true?
Through the mayor, I believe you are correct, Councillor Robertson. Yes, there is conduit laid there. I need to check the exact locations, but I believe it is. The house is. There you go. The conduit is just outside the house 44 Adelaide Road, the house that council owns.
Ah, okay, but not down to, so I think this is further down from where Councillor Hales is proposing the opposite the entrance to McCracken. But that one that you say has been laid is down towards whereabouts? Yeah, yeah, the reserve, yeah, yeah. Okay, that was my question.
Are there any further questions or any comments in relation to the motion? Councillor Glasbrook.
Oh, my only question really is whether we should be perhaps as narrow as we are in relation to suggesting a, set of lights at that intersection, whether we should look at that, holistically, as we like to say, that whole stretch, whether that is the right scenario. That would be my only question. The other thing is to answer your question that you did also send out an email about the underpass. I tried very, very hard to get an underpass. Unfortunately, council wouldn't have it, so very, very hard. Yeah, defeated again. And here we are a couple of years later. Let's put in underpass.
This is not a workshop.
Very interesting though, isn't it?
Councillor Robertson, you just
yeah,
spoke.
I would like to include in that full options, including perhaps a pedestrian bridge. I know that's not a flavour of the month for the sort of thing. It would be quite costly, but yeah, I mean that stretch of road. It's a bit like what we're trying to do on the Welsh Road, trying to retain it as a 100-kilometre bypass and not get choked up like Waterport Road with new reasons to cut the speed limit, but to keep it flowing into that area, pedestrians, I've no idea how much an overpass would, an pedestrian bridge would cost, but I think they have advantages as well.
Are you asking? Yeah, I see Marilyn, your hand up. I'll come to you in a minute. Councillor Robertson, are you asking Councillor Hales to change his motion?
Yeah,
of some
to
sort. So can you
include, because he's just talking about.
Can you be succinct about what you want included in it, please? If you want.
That all available pedestrian options are explored, not just a regular crossing, which is what you've asked for.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson, and I certainly hear your concern. As Councillor Glasbrook outlined, we had lots of discussions about overpasses, underpasses, and everything in between when we were talking about the Coles Bunnings site being built. I came to this conclusion by a process of going, what is actually practically achievable? Because realistically, it was put to us time and time again that that type of infrastructure wasn't going to fly because of X, Y, Z, and then the rest of the alphabet as well. As well as, do you want to spend $1.5 million building that type of infrastructure that services this percentage of the population versus something else? So the intent of my motion here is to give us something that can realistically be delivered in 18 months. It's about achieving an outcome for a community. I chose the location, or the suggested location, because down by the roundabout, where you would possibly think from a car perspective, putting a signalised intersection there would be better. the fact that there are there's one petrol station existing and another one set to be approved on the other corner means that it's a high traffic area and unsafe for pedestrians. So it doesn't achieve the outcome of making this more walkable and making it easier for people to move from one part of Victor Harbour to another. The location is also there because of what I was mentioning earlier in terms of desire lines. That older part of Hayborough tends to be where a lot of your young families can afford to buy their first house, as opposed to other parts of McCracken or Hayborough. And if they're trying to get to Coles, they're going to try and take the most direct route because we're humans and we're lazy. So therefore, placing it in a central location makes it the best chance of catching the widest possible group of people. So that's a really long answer for me to say, I'm really happy with the motion as I've moved it, and I'm not willing to change it in that regard.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Henderson, you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to speak?
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Hales just touched on partly what I'm going to say. I don't think we should even be considering underpasses or overpasses, not just because of the cost, but both have implicated problems. Overpasses wouldn't serve our whole community. Overpasses are no use to mothers with prams, which is one thing we're talking about here, or people on bicycles. Underpasses, if you look at European models, they have all sorts of inherited problems with them, safety concerns, etc., etc. We shouldn't even be thinking that way. So yes, I think this is a good motion on the table.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I completely support and agree with this motion. I thank Councillor Hales for bringing it up and the desire and priority that this should be for council. One thing that I guess hopefully it would be within the scope of the investigations, but I have had residents complain about that right turn into McDonald Street going up Adelaide Road. So I imagine that turn would also be within that design and consideration of what that intersection would look like. But just to hope that it does, I just sort of note that for administration. I don't think it needs to be included. But yeah, I completely support this motion.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Councillor Hales, did you want to close the debate? We've said enough. I'll now put this to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. Oh, that's some of the discussions that we had when Coles and Aldi were being built, really talked about that. And I think Deputy were going to do a traffic count or do some sort of traffic survey before they made up their mind. So maybe that information will be there that can help that. But I think that's a great idea, Nicholas. Are there any other motions without notice? If not, we move on to confidential items. And the first recommendation is that we move into confidence. I'll take that recommendation as read. The reason for moving into confidence is that the item is a matter related to tenders for the provision of goods and services for the library redevelopment project. So moving that way, Councillor Schofield, do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Hales. Any comment? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll just wait until the live stream is turned off and the